The story begins with a letter that arrived more than 20 years late. Harold Fry, a 65-year-old man, originally only went out to buy a bottle of milk for his wife. But because of one sentence from a girl at a gas station, he suddenly decided to walk across the whole of England, from the far southwest all the way to the far northeast, to see his old colleague Queenie Hennessy, whom he had not seen in more than 20 years. That morning, Harold received a letter from Queenie and only then found out that she had already moved into hospice care, and that the letter was simply her way of saying goodbye. Harold sat at the table, racking his brain over how to reply. But no matter how many times he tried, all he could write on the page was one light and empty sentence. "Thank you for your letter. I'm sorry." He took the letter and went out, originally planning to drop it into a mailbox. But after passing one mailbox after another, he kept feeling that this letter was too light, and that it could never really reach Queenie. It was not until he was in the gas station, where a girl casually mentioned that her aunt had survived cancer by holding on to faith, that Harold suddenly made up his mind. He was not going to mail the letter. He was going to walk there himself and ask Queenie to wait for him. So he set off just like that, without even bringing his phone, still wearing leather shoes that were completely wrong for a long walk and carrying very little cash. He only wrote "Wait for me" on the envelope that he had originally planned to mail, and then started walking. He did not even properly explain any of this to his wife, Maureen Fry. But once he truly left town, his strength was quickly drained. He had never walked like this before. Not long after starting, his feet already began to hurt, and his whole body was exhausted. But he knew there was no easy way to turn back now. When he reached a public phone booth, Harold called Maureen and told her he was already on the road. Maureen was shocked at first and then immediately told him to come home. When she found out that her husband had made such a crazy decision for another woman, she got so angry that she hung up. But the moment she thought about Harold's age and health, she quickly picked up the receiver again. By then Harold had already left. That first night Harold stayed in a hotel. The next morning, when he got back on the road, it was raining. The mud and cold made an already painful journey even more miserable. After only 9 miles, he had to stop and check the blisters and injuries on his ankles and feet. A little girl passing by even complained that he smelled bad. That actually made Harold calm down for the first time and stop focusing only on pushing forward. He went to buy toiletries, took a shower, dried his clothes, treated his feet, and started learning to slow down. That night, he slept unusually well, and for the first time he truly began to adapt to this impulsive journey like a real walker. Over the next few days, Harold slowly found his rhythm. He did not walk fast. When he got tired, he rested. When he got thirsty, he asked for water from people along the way. When he got hungry, he bought the simplest food he could find just to fill his stomach. Some people noticed that even when he drank a glass of water, he seemed to be seriously savoring the taste, and they could not help talking to him about the ordinary things in life. Eating, sleeping, raising children, things that looked simple on the surface but were actually the hardest to do well. When children were mentioned, Harold suddenly thought of his son, David Fry, and of all the small ordinary moments he had once ignored and could now never return to. Back at home, Maureen was also beginning to panic completely. For more than 20 years, because of what happened to David, this husband and wife had lived under the same roof like two silent strangers. They barely spoke every day, and outside of daily chores, they had almost nothing else to say to each other. But now that Harold had left, Maureen suddenly found herself sitting by the phone, afraid of missing his call. For the first time, she softened in the conversation and asked Harold to come back. But Harold still did not stop walking. By the time he reached the county town, Harold was even acting like a tourist. He visited the local church, bought a crystal pendant for Queenie, and wrote a postcard. But the pain in his body never really let him off. A few days later, because of his foot injuries, the heat, and dehydration, he passed out by the roadside. A woman passing by took him back to her home. To ease her concerns, Harold told her everything about why he was on this journey. The woman quickly understood that for Harold, this walk was not simply about visiting an old colleague. She did not press him for details. She just prepared hot water, treated his feet, and told him that she had once been a doctor in Eastern Europe, but now in England she could only work as a cleaner. The next morning, before they parted, she gave Harold a backpack, some cotton socks, and a compass. Two people who had been complete strangers just the day before said goodbye like old friends after only one night. On the other side, Maureen finally could not hold it in anymore and told their neighbor Rex everything. She admitted that her marriage had actually been dead in everything but name for 25 years. The one who had always talked about leaving had really been her. She also revealed something she had hidden for years. A few years earlier, Queenie had actually come to their house, and Maureen herself had sent her away. She never told Harold, because she had been afraid that he would leave her and go find Queenie. Harold kept walking, and little by little, more and more people began hearing about him. Some people posted his story online. More and more people recognized him along the way, brought him food, cheered him on, and even came specifically to walk with him. The first to follow him was a young man with a dog. The boy said that God had guided him to join Harold and help save Queenie. Harold originally did not want anyone following him. But when he saw the dog, he suddenly thought of David. When David was little, he had always wanted a dog, but Harold had refused him again and again. Thinking of that, Harold stopped trying to send them away. That night, while camping, the boy finally admitted what he was really feeling. He said he just wanted to do one thing that truly belonged to him, and did not want to keep drifting through life numbed by medication and emptiness. But later that night, when they heard even the slightest movement in the woods, the boy was shaking with fear. Only then did Harold completely let down his guard and hold him like a father. And because of this boy's company, the road that followed no longer felt quite so heavy. But once the group grew, things also began to get out of control. More and more people joined Harold. Some even made matching shirts for the whole pilgrimage group. The entire group became a noisy crowd of all kinds of people. Harold grew more and more uncomfortable with it. The quiet that had once belonged to him and the space for his own thoughts were all swallowed up by the noise. He could not understand what these people were really following him for. Then Maureen finally found Harold with Rex's help. When she saw her husband walking toward her from the middle of the crowd, all the anger and hurt inside her suddenly dissolved. She brought Harold into a cafe and bought him a meal. It was the first time in all the years they had known each other that she had ever treated him. At first they spoke like they always did about ordinary things. But while they were talking, Maureen suddenly broke down in tears. She told Harold that she felt like the one who had been left behind, and asked him if he could come home with her right then. But Harold refused because the destination was now only about 120 miles away, and Queenie was still waiting for him. It was also during that meeting that Maureen brought up David. When she saw the dog that had been following Harold, she remembered how David's biggest wish as a child had been to have a dog, and how that had always been one of the things Harold hated most. That tiny detail was like a key, slowly opening the part of Harold's heart that he had kept locked away for so many years. After that, the road became harder and harder. The young man who had been walking with Harold ended up stealing the crystal necklace Harold had bought for Queenie in the middle of the night. He also pulled out an empty pill bottle. Only then did Harold understand that the boy who kept talking about finding direction was actually already standing on the edge of collapse himself. The next morning, the boy was gone and only the dog remained. A deep sense of failure rushed over Harold all at once. He felt that not only had he failed to help anyone, but that once again he had stood there and watched a boy, someone who felt almost like a son, slip into darkness. He began pulling away from the group. He also started denying who he was whenever people recognized him, pretending he was just an ordinary man passing through. And what truly broke him was the long stretch of wind and rain that came next. After walking through the rain all day, Harold finally could not hold on anymore. Everything he had buried for more than 20 years came pouring back up at once.